Hi. Um, Welcome, everyone, um, to the Visiting Artist Talk with Molly Zuckerman Hartung. I'm very excited for all of you that you get to meet Molly and work with her. We're going to have a cooperative introduction. I think I'm going to read a poem and have some words, and then Kelly's going to come and have a more personal introduction. So I'm kind of like a little bit like anxious because I chose a poem that I'm not sure how to read. The poem is by Raymond Queneau, and it's titled 100,000 Billion Poems, which is in a way a self-composed poem. So every time you read it, you can read it in a different way. So I'll try and see what I come up with. The wild horse champs the Parthenon's top frieze. Prose took a Mistral's verse without a squeeze. Replies like the dumbstruck brain may tease. In pursuit, cardless that how they behave. To prove mama an adult with the trees, but I can understand you, brother Gog. One tongue will do to keep the verse agog. So that's one version of one out of the 1 billion options of this poem. I highly recommend to visit it, and it's super fun, and it's always a new, and it's always a new experiment and a cycle, and somehow I thought about it in relation to Molly's work, how kind of like the experimentation is going again and again and again and again, and evolves and moves and travels. And kind of like when I was thinking about like Molly's work, I was talking about like that Molly's work is an explosion. It's an explosion of passion and desire, a passion and desire for material, surface, space, endless experimentation, but also a very unique journey through the history of art and the history of political thinking. So I'm excited for this journey. And I'm gonna have Kelly come.
Thanks, Asaf. Oh my gosh, I have to put on my glasses. This is a new thing for me, readers. It just hangs out on my head. It is with great pleasure that I introduce tonight's guest for our SCIC Low Residency 2023 Visiting Artist and Scholar Series. A great artist, a great friend, and a great human, Molly Zuckerman Hartung. Very few people in this room remember that Molly taught with and was part of the inception of this program. It is particularly sweet for all of us to have her here this year as we celebrate the continued ethos of the low-res MFA program while we transition into our new decade. I don't remember when I first met Molly. It was at a restaurant with Steve and Judy and Lane, and at least one of us ate snails. It was in Olympia where we stood in the same woods with other gastropods and mollusks at the shore, just slipping past each other in our timeline amongst riot girls and puppetry. It was when Molly led me through cramped furniture upstairs to a Pilsen rooftop porch in the sun. I think there was a cat. It was when we ate soup and made drawings at my table, talked about love and pain and making. Molly talks about the octopus while making an ocean with her students as they chase Moby Dick. Later still, almost yesterday, a year ago, in fact, we met in the bright sun of an Italian hill town, perhaps where someone also ate snails yet again. We talk about taking up space, this space where we are our bodies. Molly asks, and I ask, what does refusal look like? In her essay, The Poetics of Disobedience, Alice Notley asserts, quote, "It's necessary to maintain a state of disobedience against everything. One must remain somehow, though how, open to any subject or form in principle, open to the possibility of liking, open to the possibility of using," unquote. I think I keep re-meeting Molly because, like Alice Notley, she occupies that beginning space. When I think of Molly's work, I think of its working as a verb. Molly's work is dynamic. It is praxis. It is painting that conjures rather than congeals, painting that is present and moves outward again, toward an urgent ongoingness. Molly's work is dialogic, involving constant questioning, questioning painting and questioning the world. I speak in tandem with her own words, saying that her responses are sometimes pictured as thrashing, flailing argument, sometimes illustrative, sometimes critically dialectical, and sometimes dreamily intuitive. And I will add, Molly is a painter whose works are intimate and fierce. It's such a pleasure to constantly move and stay still through and along and within Molly's beginning spaces. Molly Zuckerman Hartung is a painter, writer, and teacher who grew up in Olympia, Washington, and participated in Riot Girl in her formative years. She attended the Evergreen State College in the 1990s. This introduced her to holistic structural ideas about aesthetics and politics. She worked in used bookstores and bars until her 30s, when she moved to Chicago and attended the School of the Art Institute for graduate school. And now she's working and grocery shopping and taking walks in Norfolk, Connecticut with her wife, Fox Hyson, who's also awesome, and dog, Moses, whom I have not met, but I'm sure is awesome. Molly was a full-time senior critic at Yale School of Art until 2021, and she is now teaching part-time at Yale and SAIC, as well as low-res MFA, advising at various schools around the country, including our very own. She is shown at the Blaffer Museum in Houston, Texas, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, the 2014 Whitney Biennial, the program at Remap in Athens, Greece, Cadel Wilborn in Karlsruhe, sorry for my pronunciation, Germany, and many others. In 2013, Molly received a Louis Comfort Timpani Award. She's a frequent guest lecturer at many schools across the country, including, in the past few years, Princeton University, the University of Texas at Austin, Cranbrook, University of Alabama, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago Low Residency Program, and Columbia University. She's represented by Corbett versus Dempsey in Chicago. In 2021, Molly opened a mid-career survey show at the Blaffer in Houston, Texas called Comic Relief and accompanied by a monograph. Welcome, Molly.
Such an incredible introduction. I feel like that was that was smarter than anything I'm going to say. It's a hard act to follow, and the poem was fantastic. And both really felt. I feel understood, which is kind of an incredible feeling, and rare for me. I just want to say thank you to Greg for originally inviting me and Dushko for warmly reinforcing that invitation, and John for also warmly reinforcing, and Caitlin, Jenny, Aaron, Leo, and Mila for their help in the process of getting here. And then here begins the problem of chronology. Well, I'll just start since I suddenly decided to play this playlist, which is something I made for the Walker Art Center it was to accompany an exhibition called Painter Painter way back when, 2012 or something, 2010. Anyway, they asked me to make a playlist, and so I thought, well, that's the thing to play before a talk. And at least half the bands, if not more, were people that I knew from Olympia. So that's sort of the music I grew up with. It's not the only music I listened to. I was also a secret hippie and listened to Indigo Girls and Joni Mitchell and Ani DeFranco, but I had to keep all that secret because punk is full of rules. And you can't mix anything up. So which is funny, right? Because I think like when people think like, oh, you come from a punk scene, that's why you're so, and I'm like, no. That was just a different set of rules that I was constantly trying to figure out how to fuck with. But then I chose painting. Painting gave me lots to push against. I want to start there. I don't know if I want to just say something by way of Anne Carson from Eros the Bittersweet, a book I've been rereading, which is just absolutely amazing. And I've been rereading it because I've been trying to think again about an old duality or something between orality and literacy. And I feel like it's so hard to figure out about the readers, isn't it? I feel like this thing between reading, between a culture that is literate, literacy, and orality, a culture that is not, that is oral, that is based in sound and in the hearing of words and the hearing of language. That distinction is so primary for what it means to live in society with other humans. And it's very primary for me as well because in undergrad I studied French literature, language, and philosophy, and then spent many years working in used bookstores and just really, I was a heavy reader, being very embedded in language. But I wanted to be a writer, I wanted to be a translator, but I was never very good at any of that. My body was always getting in the way somehow. I just couldn't make a thought. I couldn't really structure things in the way that I now see many, many, many young people all the time, very organized in their thinking, but I was just sort of deeply, fundamentally disorganized. And I found painting and found that could be a way that the disorganization, the interruption of the body, the experience of periphery, of sound, the kind of total experience of being in the world rather than marching with words across a page, left to right, and then left to right again, and then left to right again, could offer me a new way of being in the world and thinking and moving. And then at the same time, I always want language back to help me recreate sequence, to help me think about difference, to help me put edges between things, to help me articulate something, to help me think about causality and try to problematize causality. There's so many things that language does. It helps me focus, helps me listen and listen to other people's thoughts. It helps me take in other ideas, but it's a real struggle to move back and forth between writing and painting, and between listening and a kind of oral and oral experience of the world and the written. And so I've been thinking again about wanting to really talk about that and to kind of frame my entire practice as an interest in the tension. So I'm just going to give you a tiny bit of Anne Carson on that. An individual who lives in an oral culture uses their senses differently than one who lives in a literate culture. And with that different sensual deployment comes a different way of conceiving their own relations with their environment, a different conception of their body, and a different conception of the self. The difference revolves around the physiological and psychological phenomenon of individual self-control. Self-control is minimally stressed in an oral milieu where most of the data important for survival and understanding are channeled into the individual through the open conduits of their senses, particularly their sense of sound, in a continuous interaction linking them with the world outside them. Complete openness to the environment is a condition of optimum awareness and alertness for such a person, and a continual fluent interchange of sensual impressions and responses between the environment and themselves is the proper condition of their physical and mental life. To close their senses off from the outside world would be counterproductive to life and to thought. When people begin to learn reading and writing, a different scenario develops. Reading and writing require focusing the mental attention upon a text by means of the visual sense. As an individual reads and writes, they gradually learn to close or inhibit the input of the senses, to inhibit or control the responses of their body, so as to train energy and thought upon the written words. They resist the environment outside them by distinguishing and controlling the one inside them. This constitutes at first a laborious and painful effort for the individual, psychologists and sociologists tell us. In making the effort, they become aware of the interior self as an entity separable from the environment and its input, controllable by their own mental action. The recognition that such controlling action is possible and perhaps necessary marks an important stage in ontogenetic as in phylogenetic development, a stage at which the individual personality gathers itself to resist disintegration. And I'm also wanting to think about that and wanting to share that thinking with you, because I think that we're at a crucial, strange moment, and people like Willem Flusser would be making this argument, where we might be moving away from being a literate civilization, society. We're moving into a civilization that is more oriented towards the visual, and that is different. It's a different orientation through screens, through hyperlinks and everything. And this has been an ongoing change, and people can argue with it. Marshall McLuhan was making these arguments 45 years ago, which is where I maybe first got excited about them. Not that I was there 45 years ago. Actually, it's now 60 years ago. My God, time flies. So these distinctions are just interesting to me. Okay. I was going to start with this, but I'm not. We'll move out of this Deleuze. But I think Deleuze's questions about transformation and becoming are always kind of vital for me. And I'll just leave it at that. What to do about the glasses, right? And then, will this work? What? Okay, I forgot to mention I'm starting at the end of the talk. That's why. One more time. Now we go backwards. So this is, I'm not going to read you this whole thing, but this is a short summary of a text called The Comedy of Survival by Joseph Meeker from 1974, which was one of the early texts of a now academic discipline called eco-criticism. And it's part of the place that I started really starting to use this term comic or comedic, or really thinking about what comedy could do for my thinking in a kind of, in a more comprehensive and political way, I guess. And so thinking about civilization as comic rather than tragic, rather than heroic individualism, we have, and I'll just give you this last bit, comedy demonstrates that humans are durable even though they may be weak, stupid, and undignified. At the end of the tale, the comic hero manages to marry her girl, I'm constantly changing the pronouns just for my pleasure, evade her enemies, slip by the oppressive authorities, avoid drastic punishment, and to stay alive. Her victories are all small, but she lives in a world where only small victories are possible. Comedy is a celebration, a ritual renewal of biological welfare as it persists in spite of the reasons there may be for metaphysical despair. Comedy muddles through, but seems to care little for such weighty matters as progress and perfection. So yeah, I highly recommend Joseph Meeker and his writings and others on this whole sort of field of eco-criticism. It's basically a field where ecological thinking and literary criticism meet, and it's an exciting sort of tangling of ideas about narrative, about how we make stories, and living in the ecological, living in the surround. So again, thinking about storytelling as a kind of chronological, linear structure, and ecology as a kind of experience of space and being, right? So these are the two sort of realms that I'm always trying to find something that helps me muddle through space and time. This is the monograph for the show that I just had, Comic Relief. You can maybe read relief, maybe not. It's in relief on the cover. Okay, I'm just going to walk you through backwards the show at the Blaffer real fast. I'm not really even going to tell you much about it, but here's what it looked like. This is going in the back door. I'm happy to talk more about this exhibition in colloquium or in questions, and if you just approach me, there's a lot about it online as well, and there's a lot in the book that talks about it, and each one of these paintings had a long text associated with it because that's how museums are, which was exciting for me to put a lot of didactics around it, but we're just gonna walk through it. So it was basically 20 years of work, more or less. That's the title painting. It's with the three arms, like the Three Stooges or all other comedic teams. That painting is called Comic Relief. This is the oldest object in the show. It was, I made it when I was living in Olympia in this house called the House of Doom. And it's a pinhole self-portrait. I'm deep in the back there, naked. I'm sure I had been shown Francesca Woodman and was very excited about her work. But I think that theme is going to run throughout all of the work that I show you, this kind of figure ground question. I'm sure that people think of me as an abstract painter, but I am constantly bringing the figure back for myself and for a more... So there's a lot of bodies in this work, very rarely observed, but sometimes, but felt consistently inhabited, right? Which is something that that's some close-ups of that painting. And these are the 95 Theses on the wall. This is the second time I got to put the 95 Theses and painting on the wall. The first time was in the MCA here in Chicago, which is what I wrote them for. What am I trying to say? Oh, Maria Lasnig, a painter who died not so long ago, in her 90s, German painter, made self-portraits her whole life from experiencing being in a body. She started from observation, as did I. I made a hell of a lot of self-portraits and paintings of other people before I went to graduate school, from photos and from life. So, but eventually Maria Lasnig started painting from the experiences of being in a body. And she writes extensively about this in texts like the Body Awareness Manifesto and many diaries that have been published. And it's a pretty amazing way of thinking about figurative painting because it's a felt experience. And it's not just the kind of organic experience of being in a body, it's the experience of interacting with the technologies that our bodies interact with. So even just the technology of glasses, right, is a kind of modification of the body. And so her paintings are very much about that kind of reach and extension and experience. And it's very influential on me just in how I think about my work. This is a very beginning of a project. I've found a bunch of these painting contractor magazines, and they're really exciting to me, and they basically cover like late 60s through the 80s. American Painting Contractor, right? So this is the labor half of painting. So I've been just reading them kind of carefully, increasingly carefully, and thinking about what to do with them, but thinking about how I long for that discourse somehow, and it's so I was going to sort of make collages with them or put them in a frame or something, but I'm not. I'm just reading them and trying to figure out how to build a kind of weave that brings the discourses of labor next to the discourses of art, painting as an art form, and what's meaningful about that. Even just thinking about the kind of crossover of dates, right? What's happening in 1975 in the art world and what's happening in 1975 in labor. Painters, there's one issue that is about the Alaska pipeline. Painters were brought up to the Alaska pipeline, or invited, and there was like 7 months of labor. Labor is really falling apart at this moment, as is high art. They're both kind of collapsing in ways that are fascinating when looked at together. So this talk is called Out of Order, which means two things. One is that it is not in order, at least no order that you're going to have an easy time discerning. But out of order does also mean broken, which I've just been thinking a lot about the conjunction of those two meanings, that when something is not in an order, that it is also considered broken. So that order is somehow fundamental for something being okay. When it's not in order, it's not okay. This is my front yard 2 days ago. We had some major, they say 100-year rain, floods in Norfolk, and all the way up Vermont was experiencing kind of insane rains, and right before that we were experiencing days where we should not go outside because of the smoke from the Canadian wildfires. So this is nothing new. We're experiencing this in every part of the globe now, but it's in my front yard, maybe more comedic / anxiety producing. Every story changes when it's in relation to its proximity, right? When something is very close to you, you have a very different experience of it than when you read it in the news. So this is not about refugees, climate refugees, like that ironic story that was happening a few weeks ago where there was that submersible with those 5 people, right? And then we had like 750 refugees that had died, and so we had those two stories happening. Like simultaneity, I guess, is one of the things that I'm really interested in building into all aspects of my practice, because it is just a fact of our world. But anyway, this is my front yard, and we made the misguided decision to cut the lateral off. So there has always been a pipe and I was making the argument, as soon as I get past this, I'll just show you a lot of pictures real fast, but this is what I came to tell you. I was making the argument to my wife and to the excavator as he was putting this earth down, that we might want to leave that lateral open, because I think that when it rains, that's useful, that's what brings the water and down the hill. There's a very subtle hill here that is not like it looks, right? That's just me taking a photo at a funny angle. There's a very subtle hill. But I believed that the water always wants to go down that hill. That was my belief. The excavator thought that the water would go to the rock wall. And so he sloped the next to the driveway here to send the water towards the rock wall. There's like a kind of classic New England stone wall there that you can't see. It's a little covered, and our neighbor's water goes towards their rock wall, but that's obvious, right? Because, I mean, the rock wall is shared, but they're above us on the hill. So all the water wants to go this way, is my belief. But my belief was not the only belief that was in play. There was also the excavator and my wife contending that the lateral might not be necessary and the water might not do that. And if you're on my land, you might have maybe agreed with them. It's not an obvious slope, but there is a slope. So we had this 100 years rain 2 days after we closed the lateral, and there's 3 or 4 bridges out. Like, there's people who can't get food, or they can't get out of their houses now in my little hamlet. But this is all that happened to us, is that we got a lake. It's about 2 feet deep at its deepest. But lest you think that this is a story that judges Fox, no, because she is heroic. She would hate if I was telling you this, but you're not going to tell her that I told you. But she got out there and spent 5 hours digging that lateral back out, because that's the kind of willpower that she has. So once it was dug out, the water all went just as predicted. And so there it is, rushing and rushing. And there it is, going on the other side, where it always wants to go, through the yard. And that's the stick. One of the contrivances that Fox built was she cut down 2 trees and latched them together with braces, and then put this 25-foot long stick into the lateral and got it figured out, got it dug out, so the water then could pass as the water wanted to do downhill. And I've got some rain gardens planted down there, and so things went okay after. That's all I wanted to tell you about that. Many years ago, towards the beginning of the low-res program, maybe year 2 or something, Greg asked me to give a talk on painting, and I made a talk that was 4 hours long. I only gave about 2 hours of it, and it was called Such Wet Eyes, which was a line from Robert Smithson about painters. He was placing the fluidity, the wetness, of course, that painters contend with. He was placing that in the eye of the painter. He said, such painters like to look at flooding, pooling, murky, viscous substances, that's the. But of course, also, he was talking about maybe being sentimental. He was making maybe a kind of comment about femininity in painting, tears in painting. All of this I take on, absolutely, yes, wet eyes. So I think a lot about wetness. Did a show here years ago with a number of Chicago painters called Still Wet. So wetness. So I'm starting with a really wet painting. Now I'm just going to show you a bunch of work, and I don't know what I'm going to say about it exactly. I have nothing really planned. This is a grid poem. I've been writing grid poems lately and making a lot of paintings that are more decidedly grid-based even than they used to be. I used to use a lot of sewing, and I may use it again, but I haven't been. I've been making paintings that are all on one continuous surface lately, and mostly with oil paint. But this poem is built out of 3 different books, so I'm just stealing text. The final column is from Poetics of Space. The first column is from Adorno, I believe, and the middle column is maybe, who is it? Marcuse? Yeah. That's still a textile painting, but it is a continuous surface. There's no sewing in it except for the kind of grid on top. What do I say about these? This is a 3-year-long painting. This one's maybe only a year, actually, which is kind of rare for oil painting for me. So there's a lot of like layering and changes in direction and changing my mind and putting the thing on the floor and starting over. And the sort of act of making a painting is a kind of long, deeply indecisive experience, or an experience of trying to like cut decision making, to not be in charge of what it is doing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. To stop trying to get on top of it, to stop. And one of the things getting on top of it means is like making really hard edges. So, you know, I'll work for forever on like, there's many, many coats of paint in each section, and then I'll just finally like paint over so that the two sections are now merged. So this kind of obsession with edges and boundaries, and then this kind of like pushing edges and boundaries so that they fall apart, is one of the, it's kind of like psychological work I'm doing in the studio. And changing the color, I mean, I make so many bad color decisions, or, you know, color decisions that I don't like, and then I try to change them, and this is all very pleasurable, I guess. This is actually a photo taken by my friend M. Rooney, a sculptor who came to my studio recently and was pointing out really interesting combinations, moving things around for me and pointing out relationships. And this was a relationship I'd made myself, but she said, like, what if this is one piece? Same with this one. I think that's me without a body. That's Moses, the aforementioned. He just found that leg of a deer on the road. So that's an encounter narrative. This is a sculpture, I guess, with a painting stretcher bar in it. And this little figure, I've just been really trying to let the work be as unheroic as possible lately. It's just like, I just like let down your guard. No, let it down further. No, like really fail better. Like just come on. Like do not. These are not weapons. They're not competitive objects. They're spaces of something else. This little figure, anyway, she came from the New York Times. You know, she's like ready to go off into space with her high heels and her space outfit. So thinking about like space travelers, I guess, has always been kind of subtext in my work. Maybe it's a supertext. It's more up. This material, I've started working on this sort of nylon material, so there's this kind of two trajectories going on in the studio right now. I'm really just giving you right now work, so that there's no before ideas in it. It's like, it's just materially very in the ideas. But this nylon is exciting to me, and so I actually did sew like small seams into this painting, and the seams are conductors of dye, so that the seams kind of hold the dye more than other places, and so this kind of black dyed grid emerged, and then there's a lot of glitter on the painting. Glitter is one of those new introductions into my practice. I think I'd probably used it a couple times before, but I always felt like, well, that's embarrassing. You can't use glitter. And lately I'm like, oh, yes, you can. I just give not one shit anymore. And I'm loving it. Loving being able to turn to glitter. There's, I guess, like, this is maybe a good example, actually, of a painting that I feel like feels like just exactly a mood that I want a painting to have. I mean, if you put this in front of the window, it has like, it's very translucent, and I like to make paintings that can really do something in front of a window. Yeah, that it's a kind of gloomy party, I guess. Like, I feel like gloomy party is maybe exactly what I want. It's like a party for one, you know, it's like just Like my mom always sang that song, "It's my party and I'll cry if I want to." It's just a mood, right? It's like this thing about like the studio is a place where a mood can be developed, and it's just my mood. And maybe that sounds real selfish, and that's okay. I'm a teacher. I spend a lot of my time paying attention to other people's moods. There's a lot of strong moods going on all the time, and I'm very involved in them. And there's this way in which the studio is for me just this place where it's like I feel the me, and I'm really interested in that sensory experience and how I can kind of develop that. And of course, that then becomes a way to being able to sense others better, right? It's a kind of practice that extends outward, and it's a very meaningful practice for me to not get caught up in what's going on with others. This is M. My friend just made this pairing. These paintings were paired, and then this shelf and that book, which I put through the saw, cut in half, and then reversed. It's called Our Inner Conflicts by Karen Horney, and her theory, she's post-Freudian psychoanalyst, her theory about people was that we're all either moving toward or moving away or anxious. I did read the whole book. Whenever I use a book in a work, I always read it first, cover to cover, which is like the only time I'll finish a book. More of these shelves. I just, in making this talk today, was like, oh yeah, this is totally how I'm thinking about these shelves. This is my yard in winter. That's my neighbor's house. Same stone wall, different season and slightly different section of the yard. But I started building these scrap wood shelves just to hone my building skills. I'm becoming a better and better builder, which is, in comparison to people who are good builders, not very good, but I love it. I could like spend all day building barely functional shelves. It's very satisfying to me. But these are about the size that you would put CDs on. Of course, you probably don't have any CDs. I do actually have CDs, but I don't use them for CD storage, but I like that they're about that size. They're empty, though they stay empty. They're not for putting things in. I could tell you a big story about the cows in my neighborhood, but I won't. But that's about those cows. It's another one of those nylon paintings next to one of these pieces that I'll tell you a bit more about in a second, but they are, people often say they look like shields or masks, and I've been really interested in that because those are both, well, obviously, right? Like not about vulnerability or sensitivity or openness. Like a shield and a mask are both about enclosure and barricades and boundaries, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I would say who I am today is not who I was when I was young. I was a mad as fuck, boundaried bitch. And so it's interesting, I think, to me, to do this kind of slow process of putting down my weapons and building them as objects for delectation or examination or philosophical thought or so I've started reading about armors and shields and thinking about them more as historical objects. But this shape also, for me, actually comes from another shape you'll see soon. This is a little painting. Just show you a few more paintings and then we'll see the origin of that other painting. There I am, pointing to the paintings. M took this picture too. I'm inordinately proud of this. This is like the best thing I made this year, period. This is another one. Not as good, but. I've been drawing a lot from the this book I have of photographs of Merce Cunningham dancers. So borrowing their gestures, I'll draw the dancers when I find a gesture that I really get excited about. I'll kind of redraw it over and over again, and they kind of they get into my head, and then I think this chair sculpture actually may have been influenced by that drawing. And I'm drawing them in these like aerial photos of space from, it's a Russian book about aerial photos from space, or it's in Russian and English. And this chair is a very New England chair, and obviously the caning was broken, right? That's like, I have so many chairs where the caning is broken. I keep being like, I'm gonna learn how to cane, but I never learn how to cane. I just keep making funny sculptures out of broken chairs. That's Moses again. I just wanted to share that little moment with you where he's scratching and looks funny. What did Gertrude Stein say? I am me because my little dog knows me. There's a bunch of these kind of experiments going on in the studio. They're like figure ground experiments, I guess. Like thinking about like, I would really love to be able to make many paintings that don't have stretchers. Like the stretcher is always this kind of like, back to the stretcher. These new nylon paintings really need a stretcher. They just don't do what I want them to do. But there's always this sort of like, well, how do you build something that doesn't have a kind of exoskeleton or endoskeleton, or what is skeleton, right? Like that it has its own structure. And so this is one of many recent experiments. Here's a oil painting. This looks the most like things I made like 1 year out of grad school, 2 years out of grad school long ago. Work I mostly won't show you, but you may have seen a few of them in the comic relief show. So this is about a 3-year painting. I guess that's like the birch trees in the wood. My rare bird painting. I was at Yaddo like 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago or something, and I had a practice of every time I saw an animal in the woods, I would go back to the studio and I would Google it and then make a painting just from like whatever photos I found on the internet. But it was like to mark, like, saw that woodpecker this morning. So I had a few. I had a woodpecker and a fox and a robin. A lot of robins, obviously. So you can kind of see this shape again. Swimming, like they were fish or something. Like, so I didn't even necessarily think of them as having vertical orientation. I'll get to some more of them. That's just, yeah, the studio. At one stage. This very broken lamp I recently made. A collage. Dog, I can't remember now the name of the guy that draws this dog, but he was a Yale person 1 billion years ago. So there's always this sort of like Connecticut thrift store vibe in the things that I'm making. And yeah, old, like in one of these drawings, that dog is wearing a Yale sweatshirt. And I would just say that my commitment to vulnerability and failure and anti-competitive art practice is partly related to being in an environment like Yale, where the whole structure is about extreme success. And so it defines the terms of success. And I want the terms of success to be really problematized for all of us all the time as makers. And they're very personal. They cannot be, as an artist, my terms of success cannot be, what's the word? Concurrent with capitalism's terms of success. That doesn't make any sense to me as an artist. And so, this is the second best thing I made this year, that middle piece right there. There it is again, above the chair people. And then you can see the little figure. That guy was jumping into a pile of money in this little New Yorker cartoon. So I took his pile of money away and I put him on this little loop. Very small games. This is maybe like a 4-year painting, 5-year painting. I started it sometime early, before COVID. Some more Merce Cunningham dancers. This leap. And this leap got into this painting, and I've been, in my really kind of bumbling way, trying to think about it. Am I doing okay on time? Do I have to stop in like 10 minutes, 5 minutes? Okay. 5? Okay. Okay, I'll speed up then. So yeah, this idea of like, I redraw the leap over and over and over again. The leap is suspended in time by a photograph, so it's one image, right? But then by redrawing it, I'm actually extending that image into a kind of temporal extension. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, about how that temporality works in the making. Okay, drawings. Just going to show you a bunch of drawings. You can see that same, the ink goes in the seams. It's after a Bob Thompson. It's just newsprint. Like I was looking through old photos and I was like, God, drawings. I'm just going to show a lot of drawings. I don't know if that's a good choice, but it's my choice. I draw constantly, doodle. Yeah. So that dancer, I want to get to that dancer, and then maybe that will be the end of the talk. Maybe all I wanted to tell you about these drawings was simultaneity, that when making a drawing, I'm always trying to have it do at least 2 things, or to be kind of a palimpsest in at least 2 levels. It's just a page from a book, but in front of a window, so you can see the other side. Die drawing on a pillowcase. Okay, the dancer. There she is, multiple times. Sally McCloskey was her name. There she is. So I made many, many, many drawings of this same pose. This is in New Mexico. I was doing research on the invention of the atomic bomb, which you can definitely do in New Mexico. Obviously, there's a lot of sites, and there's also sites in Las Vegas, and I went to make prints in Las Vegas, and I discovered this woman, Sally McCloskey, and she sort of became the center of my thinking about doing research on the atomic bomb. So she's dancing there in front of one of the test bombs in Las Vegas. I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but she was an exception. There was a lot of culture in Las Vegas throughout the 50s into the 60s probably. There was 1,021 nuclear tests. So, but there was tons of. I mean, you go to Las Vegas and it's like there's A-bomb restaurants and bars, and the bomb was like the slang of the 1950s. Like everything was A-bomb associated in this way that's kind of seems normalized now. And there was a lot of beauty contests around the bomb, and they were doing them they were exploding nuclear bombs very close. What was it, 60 miles away? Is that right? The facts are all here. I forget every fact. But they were doing them, once a month or something, constant. And so people would go out and watch them. They'd have cocktail parties. They were usually at dawn. But this in particular was a kind of weird one. This one was actually a political act. So the photographer and Sally cooked this up. She went and danced, and he photographed her, and this was actually against the bomb. So much of this was celebratory. So I've been working on these prints that are kind of based on the Morton Salt logo, "When it rains, it pours," and Sally McCloskey dancing in front of the bomb. There's going to be a whole series of them. That's my studio wall, and there you see all of those shields, along with a lot of other things. And that's a painting I often show at the beginning of my talks. It's got a few painting jokes in it. If you're actually in front of it, you can read them. What do they say? What do paintings and clean jokes have in common? They're both flat. And then it says, what can you do, upside down? I really just want to tell you about the vagina. Okay. And then we'll be done. So these are these vagina paintings that I started making. They're also eyes, they're also mouths. They're also that shape, when it's made into a positive shape, looks like a shield. But yeah, that's where they're coming from. And these paintings kind of kicked off all the work that I feel really excited about now. I feel like they really were a kind of breakthrough for me. When I was in school, if you made a vagina painting, you were like, written off. Like, that was just like, what kind of embarrassing, pathetic female are you, right? And we're living in a different time. There's so many things that I don't like about the time we live in, and that's one of the things that I do like. That a vagina painting now is something that a lot of people are making, and I think that's fucking rad. Everybody should have a vagina painting. Or many. But anyway, mine were made with a lot of materials stretched over the same surface. So they're not layered as painting, they're layered as material, and then they're cut back into and safety pinned. There's an example of one of them. And they were really made also out of looking through old sketchbooks and journals and diaries and looking at old drawings and really thinking about the kind of accumulation of paper in my life. So the whiteness comes from the paper. But then I started thinking about the whiteness of Connecticut, the white houses, the white people. That is also the snow. So there's a sort of like a slippage of signifiers in those paintings that I'm really excited about. And somehow that really opened up everything in my practice. This is a painting that I made from looking at this painting. So I made it right next to it, and it's those same shapes, but kind of like coming to life and getting semiotic slippage. They're transforming. This is oil paint. All right, I feel like I'm just gonna do this to you and then be done. That's one of those shelves. This is what I decided to do with it. Take a photo through every hole. No, I'm really out of time, but this is a slide that I made when I was in grad school here. You have to give a talk at the end of your time as a grad student, so this is 2007, and it was a drawing that I made, a list of all of the deaths, many violent ones that I had experienced up to that time, people that I knew who had died. Because I realized that my entire time here, I sobbed my way through grad school, and it was just about huge quantities of grief that I hadn't even found a form for. And so I keep pulling this slide out, and just the other day I pulled it out, and I was like, right, not just the other day, this winter, I'm gonna photograph the slide and keep this in my life. And there's 10 more deaths I need to put on that list, because there's just so many. I just went to another funeral. A lot of people from my scene were drug addicts and things, so a lot of friends died. A lot of heroin overdoses and things, and I guess I've just started wanting that to be a kind of open and verbal part of my practice, that there's a lot of grieving that I'm doing, and I'm interested in how we grieve and how we can share that we grieve, because we all lose a lot, and so being able to discuss grieving practices and forms of grief is more and more interesting to me. So that's the thing about building empty shelves. Is that for me? There's the yard. Maybe we'll just end it on Buck. There's so many more to show you, but I'll just stop there. Thank you. we have time for a few questions? Did I use up my time? Okay, good, good.
Anybody have a question for Molly? Easy.
I have a Hi. Thank you so much. I have a methodological question, or maybe like the teacher in me wants to ask that question, or maybe hear a little bit about the language we can talk about painting. A lot of students here, we kind of like talk about, or try not to talk about, the aboutness of the paintings, what your painting is about, or what's the meaning behind your work. And something that was beautifully presented is a different kind of like a phenomenological language that is very descriptive rather than interpretive. Descriptive, yeah. Yeah. Which is super interesting, and I think it's an interesting pushback or response to those kind of expectations from painting and the way to talk about painting. So it would be love to hear a little bit more about that for, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could say a million things about that. That is super intentional. And it's not about freedom. I can say that. I mean, it makes what you just said makes me think about when I put that No painting, which is titled Notley. I put it in the Whitney Biennial back in 2014, and for the didactics, the person, they wrote this thing without consulting me that was about the meaning behind the painting. And I guess that's it's pretty important to me to be a materialist and to say there is a wall, actually, behind the painting. There's a screw or brackets, there's stretcher bars. There is no meaning back there, right? I mean, that wall might have meaning, but it's a wall. So what's actually behind the painting? And if we talk about that wall, we can talk about how meaning is produced, right? As you all, I'm sure, have been learning and thinking about, institutions. That's what something means. It means where it is. It means how it is. And so I guess those things are really, the specifics of that kind of language are really, really important to me. Poetry is really important to me in its care and specificity with words. So I do think my paintings are meaningful, and they are concerned with meaning, deeply concerned with meaning, but not in a way where I'm putting it in there, I guess, because I think that's a little silly to think that I could be putting it in there. For me, that just seems like, it's like we're all meaning things in relation. It's a kind of constant relational experience. And this dichotomy between orality and literacy, I think, is a lot of to think about how does meaning get made in a text? How does meaning get made? One of the things I'll say about that really fast before I stop, orality is if you've only ever heard words, you wouldn't hear how separate each word is. When you're hearing them, they all sound like a big stream. It's a big river. It's a flow. It's an ocean. There's words all connected to other words, right? It's only through reading that we begin to understand that every word is separate, that's how we also understand that every person is separate. That whole connection to me is just mind-blowing, right? That I understand myself as separate because I read. I don't know, that for me is the phenomenological/material way of understanding what a painting is. And then that allows me to kind of fuck around in the studio, because I'm water has a place that it wants to go. Fluid goes where it wants to go. I'm not in charge, right? I'm not saying, water, go this way. Water goes where water goes, eventually. Right.
Hi.
More questions. I love questions. Yeah.
You said that you used to be mad or mad boundary bitch or something, and I wonder what you were mad about and how did you stop being mad?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question. But it's a pretty generous question. Is it because you know about being mad? Yeah. I was mad because when I was 12, they wouldn't let me play on the football team. I was mad because I had a stepfather who was an NRA member and was a really angry, fundamentally angry man, and I didn't feel recognized or felt by him. I was mad because my mom was mad because she was married to a man who was an NRA member. It was, I was born into anger, I think, in a large way, and into a need for boundaries that I couldn't really get. And I think it's like I was really good at trying to fight back against things that were like not the things in front of me, right? I mean, I think it's actually really, I read and think a lot about feelings and affect theory, and anger arises, I now understand, because one needs a boundary, right? Like something needs to be protected against or defended against. But it's not always the thing that's in the room with you. It might be something like you might still be fighting a battle for the safety of your childhood that you didn't have. And I guess that's what I would say, is that I was fighting for a childhood that wasn't safe, that I was still angry with people who had nothing to do with that for many years afterwards. I could go on and on, we'll talk later. How did I put it aside? Grief, crying, like embracing the movement of loss, right? Like so, and I still don't always put it aside, But I think figuring out how to let things go, figuring out how to let a lot of things go, figuring out which battles I should be fighting. Hell of a lot of grief.
Hello. Thank you for your talk. I'm curious about two things. I'm very interested in your shelves and what you said about learning to, make shelves better or more technically proficient, but also your comment about how you're committed to this kind of art object culture that you seem to be involved in. So I think those are two kind of interesting juxtapositions, if you could just speak to that more.
So the commitment to skill building, is that part of what you're speaking about?
I think so.
Yeah. I wonder, we don't have time for me to do this, but maybe they're not so far away. I have this whole body of work that I call curves. They are curves. Boy, are they that far away? Sorry. Where I was cutting curves at Yale. In the wood shop, because I didn't have a shower at home. I lived in a warehouse that didn't have a shower yet. I spent a year, half an hour away from Yale. So I was teaching full time, and my colleague gave me a key to the bathroom in the basement of the sculpture building. And because it was a bathroom that they had, that was supposed to be for students or whatever, but they locked it up at some point. It had a shower in it because the students were having orgies in it. And so then it was just my personal shower. I had a key, and it was in the sculpture building, and so I could then go upstairs and use the saw, and I always forget which saw it is. It's the one that, thank you, the bandsaw. Amazing, thanks, Kelly. And I would stand there and use that damn bandsaw and cut scrap wood into curves. Every time I took a shower. So I'd go up there with wet hair and then, and it was really, really intimidating and scary for me, and that's ridiculous, but every time I used the saw, because I was cutting a curve, it would do a slight whine. The shop person, who was a friend of mine, would come over and just keep their eye on me. And this made me so mad and so scared and so anxious. And I realized that this was my feeling all the time at Yale. I know I'm a failure and they're gonna figure it out. And everybody feels this, they call it imposter syndrome. But as a teacher, it's like at some point you have to do something about that feeling. Like you are here, for better or worse, like what, you know. So there was just this real working through and this real curiosity about it. And I made a show at Rachel Leffner in New York called Learning Artist that was about that and about my curiosity about how we learn, which we mostly do in public, and how learning is I don't know, I want to say embarrassing, maybe there's a better word, but it involves a vulnerability that is hard to perform publicly, and yet that is what school is. And so I'm still very interested in that, and I'm very interested in how that then becomes something that we're doing as a form of competition in capitalism, and necessarily so because there's so few cookies and so many of us, you know. So does that answer what you were asking? The shelf, I guess the shelf being empty is also really significant, and it being small so that it would have you would like maybe would imagine CDs or something, but the kind of the kind of like every form of culture is gone now, like the objects of them, right? Like my record collection, my CD collection, like all these things that might have shown you something about my affinities or my social commitments or something, like these empty shelves, they're holding space, I guess, for maybe other forms of connection and commitment and community that are now privatized, or, you know, you wear your headphones. Who talks to other people about what they listen to? It's rare. Like, I know a lot of young people who tell me, like, I don't want anybody to know what I'm listening to. That's my private space. Again, this idea of that being private is like kind of mind-blowing to me. Stop, but yeah.
Hello. So I have a question, or I think I have a question. You gave me a lot to think about, and let me see if I can formulate it. The wetness that you talked about, I'm just going to pick a few things. So there was the wetness, there was the water, and you spoke about its direction of where it wanted to go, and the need to assist in that process. I thought that was beautiful. I want to talk about the reverse process of showing this slide, how intentional you were about that, but the message is no order, right? And then there's also this other aspect of, well, there's no meaning behind the wall. There's the wall, but it's really, this is what it is. This is what you need to be looking at. This is it. And so I'm kind of curious about your creative process. If there is an approach, can you walk me through how that might feel? And then when it's time to complete, or if there is a definition of completion in your world, what does that look like? Because there's different aesthetics. I can see a lot of different application in a lot of your different works. And I'm just really curious if you could kind of like.
Those are amazing questions. Just like connecting all those things up is really interesting. There definitely is no goal of like what it's going to look like, or at least when I discover that there is a goal about that, I'm trying to let that go. Yes, there is. I think you pointed to something that might sound a little duplicitous, right? Like it's like there's no order, but of course I did them backwards. There's an order. But that order is something every time I give a talk, and I've given a lot of them at this point, that I change every time. Dana DiGiulio, who is often taught in the program. You guys know Dana? She was my partner for a long time. And she had a practice, she's a painter. She had a practice of putting photographs in books, like randomly, like important photographs that might make you cry if you looked at them in the right moment, right? She would just stick them in books on the shelf. And then they'd be like little time bombs. Like they would just, you just open up that book and then, oh, there's those photos. So I used to talk a lot about storage, actually, because storage is a pretty primary structure for me. I worked in used bookstores for a decade, and my stepfather owned a mini storage when I was a kid. That was the family business. So I've really thought a lot about storage, and I used to say paintings are storage. And so I guess one of my strategies is to not store things very well, or to store them in ways where contiguities, adjacencies, like to make messes, to let mess be part of my practice in different ways, or to store things, like in a disorganized fashion, so that like is not always with like, therefore surprises occur, poetics occur, other relationships occur. And I would say that's the structuring of the talk as well. It's how do I get it to surprise me one more time? Because otherwise I'm just going to give you the same thing. And what I'm hoping for is that something new keeps emerging, so that I just stay in the process, because that's where I want to be. Because I didn't become an artist to make anything in particular. I became an artist so that I could transform again and again.
So I'd like to ask about your process of denarrativizing works and staying with muddling in the middle. Can you talk about that? Would you?
Did you say staying with muddling the middle?
Yeah, it was in the Blackwell, yes.
Yeah. I wrote this short story when I was 20 called In the Middle of the Muddle. I can't believe, like, even back then I was like, that's what I'm thinking about. And I was just writing in my journal today about the middle generally, and thinking about, I just did a talk a couple of days ago with an old friend, Sarah Marcus, who just published a book called Political Disappointment. And she talks in that book, she writes in that book about, there's one whole chapter on feminism, and the shift in feminism between 1978 and the early 80s. The backlash that was happening, and then the Combahee River Women's Collective, so the emergence of women of color feminism, and the kind of splitting between white and women of color feminism. She writes about that moment in feminism, and it's a really amazing chapter, and she talks about the figure moving from voice to vision. So feminism had been really centered around voice as an image, as a metaphor, and it became more and more about vision. And so she starts the chapter off with Pat Parker, a lesbian feminist of color in 1978, I believe, reciting a poem, which is wonderful to listen to. I recommend it. I'm going to get to the point in 1 second. The poem is called Don't Let the Fascists Speak. And it's so fucking good. And I've been thinking about it constantly. And there's these moments in it, like again and again, the repetition of the line, innards churn. And the innards churning is the repetition that eventually conjures, for Pat Parker, the images of women in camps, Jews in camps, socialists in camps. Like, it eventually generates for her a powerful set of images that allow her to articulate why the fascists should not have free speech. It's a beautiful poem. It's really worth listening to, and it's worth listening to the rhythms of it. Anyway, I have been thinking constantly now about that poem and that line, innards churn, as a way of, like, thinking about the middle, not temporally, but physiologically. And both, I guess, not, but both, just temporal and physiological middleness, midsection, like letting the middle be the source of intuitive, I mean, one says one listens to one's gut, right? But I think, I don't know, I guess I've been really trying to open that up as a kind of metaphorical space. Did that answer the whole question, or was there a beginning part? Okay.
We have time for one more question.
That was our little performance. Molly,
This one over here. Oh, it's yours. No, go, Kylie. Go.
it's me.
The whole joke was that.
This was the joke.
But we can have two more questions.
Yeah.
Is there another question over here? Did somebody have another question over here? Okay,
Okay, let me ask my question,
on.
and then we can have one more
we have
question.
time for 2 more questions.
Okay.
Kelly.
That was a
I get it now. I didn't get it.
that was a beautiful answer for the middle and the muddle. My question or my thoughts. I just have some thoughts about this idea. Early on, you were talking about like potentially writing and reading and writing, but also like the sense of it always sort of filtering through the fact that you're this body, right? And that the body needed to kind of do. And I've been watching these images, and I've always, with your work, thought through this, the way in which you distinguish, I am a painter. I mean, the very first line of 95 Theses, I am a painter. And yet, so much of what I see ends up using terms that you've never used: assemblage, collage, assemblage, building,
I know, I never-
additive, mobile, like the works, right? And even it strikes me continuously since I've known your work, the way that you use wetness is to build. And I'm really curious how, we've been talking in my small groups about, for instance, my work, when I use lens-based work, it's thinking through sculpture and its terms. So I'm very curious to ask you the I am a painter insistence, but also the way in which we receive or encounter the work is through, and it's not just the building of shelves, it's everything in
very
how
sculptural.
you're very much a builder.
Yeah.
And so both within, there's not a pictorial place, there's a built place that's in these paintings. And I wonder if you could just have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, and I actually am always telling myself, like, write about collage. Use the word collage. I'm a total believer in collage, and I love that word, assemblage. Like, I love those media.
Relief.
Relief, yes, relief. Yeah, and I do have a nervous breakdown like every month or something where I'm like, I'm a sculptor, this is ridiculous. But then I'm like, well, actually, you don't really know how to do anything. And anyway, it's something about, it's not, my feeling about discourse and discipline is discursive. I know the discourse of painting really well. The language, the conversations, the retorts, the positions and the counter positions. That is the conversation that I am engaged in. I love sculptors, I love sculpture, I love looking at it, but I'm not talking with sculpture yet. Although that M. Rooney that I was talking about was in my studio, and she kept calling all the sculptures sculpture, and she's a sculptor, and I was like, fuck, that's exciting. Like, so there's always room for change there, but I just think since I've been in that discourse, and I've loved being in that discourse, I mean, I had so many jokes about it, like painting his dad is one of my oldest jokes. I'm a bastard painter. Like, I had a lot to sort of play in there as like a feminist in the house of painting. But painting has also changed really dramatically in the last 15 years as it's finally started acknowledging women and people of color, and it's been changing its approaches. But I want to say something really specific, which is that I think sometimes I'm using sculpture to put an image into space, to put it into motion, to get an image to feel active. And a lot of images for me coming from books in particular, but of course photography more generally. Fox right now is reading a lot about photography. She's a painter. She never would use photography in her painting, but everybody takes photographs of paintings. And I'm maybe very obviously committed to the really bad photos, or like the contextual the photos in life, like this is like, there's a brick fireplace behind this piece on purpose, because like I'm photographing it in situ, if you will, like in my life. So there's these ways in which images are really at play in the work in a kind of like subtle way, and I guess I'm interested in that play between image and object, and I'm always sort of trying to get it to do things that I don't talk about it doing, but I'm hoping you notice, like when I stick a little tiny drawing inside of a little plastic container, and it's, there's like, yeah, because images can seem like real or natural or something, and they're not. I have so much more to say about that, but I'll just stop there. Last one.
Hi, thank you. So earlier tonight, you talked about a lot of your work has this element of affect, and then you also said something, well, you have all these multiple layers of different types of materials and objects that you use in sculpture. Obviously, we were just talking about that. And I guess you also said that the work is a mood, and that you tap into it as a way to reach out to others. And I'm wondering if you could just drill down on that a little bit more. Thank you.
So very recently, that mood, Heidegger has this line, like, we're always in mood. There's no, like, not mood. There's counter moods or something. But I would just say that being in the studio, in the process of making things through color and material and time and kind of slowness, I guess, a mood sort of develops sometimes. And for years, actually before that white vagina piece that I was talking about, when, like, you can tell you can't really understand anything about before in this talk, but we were going to get to it. Like, all these folded pieces, actually, these are all befores. I was feeling really jumbly because there's so much stuff in the studio that is not of me. It's just stuff that I've pulled in that I'm interested in. Tons of textiles. I had a good 5-year run of collecting textiles in New England and thinking about them and just letting them be part of my practice. There was about a 10-year period of sewing with textiles. And I guess for me, the bringing in of materials from the world is this kind of like slow, awkward process of trying to sense otherness, just the not me of the world, right? Like, it's just like, I don't know, what is this weird paisley? Does that remind me of anything? Paisley corduroy, huh, interesting. It's kind of a weird murky purple, like, I don't know, like, what does it feel like? It's kind of bumpy and kind of shitty and thin, and, you know, I'm just like spending like huge amounts of time just like meh, feeling the feeling of that material, whatever that is. And so that's what I mean by mood. And I think only recently has the mood been feeling, again, I mean, I've had this before, but again, somehow like mine. Like, I go into the studio lately and I'm like, holy fucking shit, it feels good in here, feels like me. I like it. I'm like kind of strutting around in the studio lately, which hasn't happened in years, you know? I'm just like, there's something good happening here. It feels cohesive even, or something. And so it's like now suddenly the studio gives me a mood. I can show up in the shittiest place. I can just feel like I hate everybody. And I walk in and I'm like, oh, but you got a great sense of color and there's some kind of cool lines going on and there's a mood in here and it's a little stronger and kind of holding me a bit. So I guess it's that, you know. I mean, every time I walk into anybody else's studio, which I spend a lot of time in other people's studios, that's the first thing I'm trying to sense is like, what's the mood in here, you know? And it's usually a lot of it's coming from the person, but the materials have a feeling too. And often that feeling or mood that I'm talking about is kind of sensed through disarray on some level, right? And what kind of disarray? Like, is it active or, so I don't know. It's kind of a fun thing to try to piece out, like, what is mood, but.
Thanks, Molly. On that, we're going to say goodnight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful set of questions and audience, and yeah.